They said I'd moved away. Funny thing is, no one told me I had. I was sitting by the window in my flannel housecoat, same as every morning, cradling a lukewarm cup of instant coffee. The neighbor's dog barked at the mailman. The house 2 doors down still hadn't fixed their broken porch light. Nothing had changed, and yet, apparently, I had vanished. At 78, mornings come slow. I move slower, but I'm still here. Still in the same house where I brought my son home from the hospital wrapped in a blue cotton blanket. Still in the kitchen where I made my late husband's favorite banana bread every Sunday. Still folding laundry on the same creaky oak table we bought when Nixon was president. So imagine my surprise when Shirley from across the street called and said, "I heard you moved to Tallahassee, Maryland. When did that happen?" "I didn't," I said. "Oh," she paused. "That's odd. Andrew said you'd gone to live with a friend. Something about your knees and needing help?" I looked down at my knees, stubborn, sore, and very much still in Missouri. Shirley meant well. She always did. But her voice left a sour taste in my mouth that the coffee couldn't wash away. I didn't ask for explanations. I just thanked her for calling and hung up. I sat there a long time after that, watching dust float in the sunbeams like little memories trying to land. I reached for my cardigan, even though it wasn't cold. Habit. I glanced at the framed photo on the mantel. Me, Andrew, and my husband, Richard, taken this summer. Andrew turned 6. Richard's arm was around my shoulders. Andrew's face was freckled and beaming. He used to love this house, used to run down the hallway in his footy pajamas, dragging that worn-out stuffed bear by the leg. He used to curl up beside me on the sofa, all elbows and questions. When did I become a burden? The mail came late that day. I heard the flap of the box and the low hum of the truck pulling away. Among the flyers and coupons was an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. I slid it open with my nail, a card. "Congratulations on your new home," in shiny gold print. No sender. Inside was a gift certificate to a local home goods store and a note. "Wishing you peace and comfort in your new space. Love, the Parkers." The Parkers. From Andrew's church group. They'd been over for dinner once, years ago. I remembered the wife complimenting my curtains and the husband asking for second helpings. Peace and comfort in my new space. So the story had spread. I was officially relocated. I looked around at my so-called old space, a crocheted afghan on the recliner, the scent of lemon polish on the bookshelf, my wedding china still behind the glass doors I wiped every Thursday. I hadn't packed a thing, hadn't made a plan, hadn't left. And yet, according to my son, I was gone. That night I didn't sleep. I just sat in bed with the lamp on low, flipping through the old address book I kept in my nightstand. Most of the numbers were scratched out or marked deceased. I wondered what Richard would say if he were still here. He'd say, "Don't let them erase you." I closed the book and turned off the light. In the dark, I whispered to the ceiling, "I haven't moved anywhere." And I hadn't. But someone sure wanted me to. The next morning, the house felt even quieter than usual. Not peaceful, vacant, as if it were waiting for someone who hadn't shown up. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the same cracked tile near the sink, the one Andrew used to trip over as a boy. He used to laugh when he fell. Now he couldn't even speak the truth about where his mother lived. I hadn't called him. I wasn't ready. I wanted facts, not feelings. And I found the first one by accident. When I went to check the mailbox, rusted, leaning slightly toward the sidewalk like an old man with a crooked back. I noticed something odd. The slot was stiff, like it hadn't been opened in days. But I'd picked up mail just yesterday. I opened it, and behind the fresh stack of flyers and bills was a folded paper, tucked in too deep, like someone didn't want me to find it. It was a printed letter, one of those formal notices with bold font and headings. I pulled it out and read the header. Final closing disclosure. 204 Elmhurst Drive. My address. My house. I read it again. The letter was from a title company. A closing document, listing property transfers, loan terms, and escrow details. A house sale. My house. Dated 2 weeks ago. My stomach dropped. The name on the document listed Andrew J. Bowen as the seller. No mention of me. I stood on the porch in my slippers, the wind blowing at the hem of my robe, reading every line twice, then a third time, and I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a transaction. According to this document, my house had been legally vacated, the title transferred, the sale in process. The only thing missing was me. I walked back inside, the paper clenched in my hand, my pulse louder than the clock ticking on the wall. I laid the letter out on the table like a map of betrayal. He was selling the house, not just telling people I'd moved. He was making it real, making sure there'd be nowhere for me to return to, nowhere I could belong. A call to the title company confirmed what I already feared. The woman on the line was polite but distant, as if reading from a script. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I can't release detailed information unless your name is on the account." "This is my house," I said. "I live here. If your name isn't on the deed, I'm afraid—" I hung up before she could finish. I'd never added my name to the deed after Richard passed. We bought the house in his name, back when it didn't matter who signed what. After he died, I stayed. I paid taxes, kept it standing. But legally, it belonged to Andrew. Richard had left it to him, trusting that a son would do right by his mother. Now the son was doing what he called necessary restructuring, and he didn't bother telling me. I walked from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The floral wallpaper in the hallway, the faded footprints in the carpet where the couch used to be, the etched names on the pantry door from when Andrew was 5 and decided he wanted to be taller than the fridge. How do you sell a place still full of ghosts? By pretending they don't matter. By pretending the person living among them has quietly disappeared. I sat back at the table, the paper still in front of me. It felt heavier now, like it carried not just information, but insult. And something deeper, too, an ending I hadn't agreed to. I heard a car engine outside and peered through the blinds. A sleek black SUV pulled into the driveway, too clean to be local. The engine idled for a moment, then shut off. A woman stepped out, in a beige coat and heels too sharp for our cracked walkway. She walked toward the porch, checking her phone. A realtor. Of course. She paused at the bottom of the steps, confused by the drawn curtains, then turned back and got into the car. Drove away. I didn't open the door, didn't say a word. She hadn't knocked. No one expected me to be here, but I was. And I would be. It started with the vase, a simple cream-colored thing that had sat on the windowsill for 20 years. A wedding gift from Richard's sister, the kind of object you don't think much about until it isn't where it should be. I noticed it that afternoon. I was wiping the countertop, going through motions more than anything, when I glanced toward the window and froze. The vase was turned. Not gone. Not broken. Just shifted. Not the way I'd left it. Not facing forward like always, but rotated just slightly, so the chip at the base faced outward. I'd spent years hiding that chip. It wasn't much, but I remembered it clearly. A crack from the year the shelf collapsed during a spring cleaning frenzy. Only one person would know not to leave it like that. Me. I walked through the house slowly, like I was entering a stranger's home. I ran my fingers over the sideboard. A thin trail in the dust, as though someone had touched it, then thought better of it. The faintest print, like a finger had lingered too long before pulling back. Then the back door. I hadn't opened it in weeks. My knees don't love the steps and the garden's more weeds than flowers now. But the lock? It was turned. I always left it on the second latch. Richard's habit. 2 clicks, he used to say, even in a quiet town. But now it was only 1, as if someone had entered, locked it halfway, and left without fixing it. I stepped out into the yard. No footprints in the soil, though it hadn't rained in days. No broken fence slats. Just a few scattered leaves and something that made my breath catch. A cigarette butt near the porch. Andrew never smoked, nor did Annabelle, but I knew who did. Toby, their friend, contractor. Loud laugh, always needed something. He helped Andrew clean up the property last spring, stayed for dinner after fixing the loose gutter. He smoked those thin menthols and always tossed them outside like it was harmless. I remember, because I'd asked him not to. So he'd been here, recently, without a word. I stepped back inside, locking the door with both clicks this time. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with something harder to admit. Something worse. Invasion. Not of my house, of my memory. They'd been here, inside. Touching things. Moving pieces of my life around like staging furniture. Preparing for something. Maybe for a listing. Maybe a walkthrough. Maybe just to see what was worth keeping. I sat on the sofa, feeling the cushions give under my weight like they always did, like they'd learned my shape. The silence was thicker now, as if the walls had seen something they weren't allowed to speak of. I picked up the phone and dialed Andrew's number. He didn't answer. I didn't leave a message. What was there to say? Hey, son, just wondering when you were planning to tell me you were selling my home? Also, thanks for stopping by without knocking. Hope you enjoyed rearranging my life. No. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. Instead, I called Hallie, my granddaughter. The only one who still texted me just to say she loved me. Who came by with soup when she thought I was under the weather. Who'd asked me months ago if she could interview me for a college paper about women who raised families alone. She picked up on the second ring. Grandma? Hi, sweetheart. Her voice softened. Is everything okay? I almost said yes. Almost pretended I just wanted to hear her voice. But something in me cracked. Has your father mentioned anything about the house? There was a pause. A nervous one. The house? Yes. This house. I mean, not to me directly. But I heard Dad talking to Mom about how complicated things were getting. Something about the taxes and maintenance, and how it might be time to simplify. Did he say I was moving? Now the pause was longer. Yeah, she said quietly. He told everyone at church that you'd gone to stay with a friend in Florida, that you needed warmer weather. I looked out the window. The sun had dipped low. The trees cast long shadows over my lawn. Did you believe him? No, she said immediately. I didn't. That's why I've been texting so much. I figured if you'd moved, you would have said goodbye. I swallowed. Thank you, I said, and then hung up. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the hall closet, opened the door, and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a folder with the name of our family attorney and a spare set of keys to a storage unit Andrew didn't know I had. I'd kept some things there. Old papers, valuables, my name on everything. That night, I didn't sleep again. But not from grief. I was planning. Because if they were preparing for a future without me, I wanted to be there when it arrived. The postcard was innocent enough. Pastel-colored, with a watercolor image of a sunny backyard gathering, folding chairs, string lights, a grill. At first, I thought it was another one of those generic advertisements for lawn services or meal kits. It had landed in my mailbox among bills and donation requests, barely noticeable. But it was hand-addressed. And on the back, in Hele's rounded handwriting, it read, "Can't wait to see you at Dad's dinner next weekend." He finally agreed to do something big for the family. Mom even got those ridiculous lanterns she's obsessed with. Hope you bring that potato salad. Love you, H. Dinner. Next weekend. Big. I read it 3 times. The words didn't change, but something shifted in me each time I read them. Andrew was hosting a family dinner, a celebration, and I hadn't heard a single word about it. Not a phone call, not a message, not even a vague, polite invitation to drop by if you're up for it. Just silence. And now a postcard meant for someone who, according to everyone else, didn't live here anymore. I stood in the hallway, the card in my hand, while the shadows on the wall crept longer as afternoon bled into evening. The family dinner was being held at my house. I wasn't sure how I knew that. It wasn't written anywhere. But I knew. The timing. The sudden need to simplify. The cleaning crew I'd seen parked outside last week when I was supposedly at the doctor's. The faint smell of fresh lemon cleaner in the air when I returned, even though I hadn't used any. They weren't just hosting a dinner. They were hosting it here. Without me. I looked down at the card again. The easy way Hallie had written it. So cheerful. So normal. So unknowing. She thought I'd be there. Because she believed still in the shape of family. Because she hadn't been let in on the new narrative. Because, in her world, grandmothers didn't just disappear. I put the postcard on the kitchen table and sat down across from it. My palms were damp. My heart was beating, not fast, not in fear. It was the slow, deliberate rhythm of clarity settling in. This wasn't a miscommunication. It wasn't an oversight. It was exclusion, carefully planned. Quietly executed. Sanitized of conflict. They didn't want me to say no. They didn't want me to cause trouble. So they made sure I wouldn't be there at all. Made sure I wouldn't know. But they forgot one thing. I was still here, still alive, still watching. Still the woman who once kept this family running with 1 paycheck and 2 hands. And if Andrew thought he could erase me from this story as easily as ignoring my number, he had another thing coming. I spent the rest of the evening walking through each room, one by one. The dining room table still had the linen runner I'd sewn by hand the year Andrew got married. The one Annabelle said was a little too rustic for her taste. The walls still bore the tiny nail hole from where our anniversary photo used to hang before it mysteriously fell during one of their visits. The guest bathroom had a new soap dispenser, one I hadn't bought. A sleek, ceramic thing with a label in French. In the fridge, items I never purchased. Flavored seltzers, gluten-free crackers, fancy cheese wrapped in wax paper, were neatly arranged on the middle shelf. It was already happening. The transformation. turning my home into theirs while I was still breathing under its roof. I opened the cabinet above the stove. Behind a row of spice jars was a small brass tin. Inside it, letters. Dozens of them. Old, yellowed, soft from age. Love letters from Richard. Notes from Andrew in his boyhood. Mother's Day cards, scribbled drawings, a school essay titled, "Why My Mom is the Best." I pulled out the essay and read it at the table, lit by the last bit of sun through the kitchen window. My mom works hard. She doesn't stop until everything is done. She makes me grilled cheese with the crusts cut off and tells me bedtime stories that aren't scary. She always knows where my other sock is. When I grow up, I want to be brave like her. I folded the paper gently and put it back in the tin. Then I reached for the phone. This time, I didn't call Andrew. I called my lawyer. "Ellen? It's Marilyn Joyce." "Yes, I know it's late. I need to discuss something urgent." My voice was steady. My heart was calm. Because they'd planned a dinner in my house, under my roof, telling everyone I was gone. And now, I was planning my return. The lie had a strange elegance to it, a soft deceit wrapped in something that sounded caring. She moved to Florida, needed sunshine and support. Her friend down there, what's her name, Lucille, had space and offered to take her in. She's doing fine, just wanted a change. That's what Andrew told them. The neighbors, the church folks, Hallie's classmates, even Annabelle's Pilates group, who never cared much for me to begin with. It made him sound thoughtful, dutiful even. A son making sure his elderly mother was cared for. Only, I hadn't moved anywhere. And I don't have a friend named Lucille. I sat on the edge of my bed the night I confirmed the story. A message from Carol, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years but who'd heard about my relocation and wanted to know if I liked the orange groves. I stared at the blinking cursor as I typed, "Still in Missouri. Don't believe everything you hear." The truth looked so small, typed out like that. But it wasn't small. It was erasure. And Andrew had been careful, quiet, clean about it. No fights, no harsh words. Just a narrative slid into place like a rug pulled gently from under my feet. He didn't want the inconvenience of me, not the burden, not the reminder of where he came from, not the mother in the old armchair who knew too much. After I ended the call with Ellen, the lawyer who'd helped settle Richard's affairs 20 years ago, I pulled out the metal box from the closet and spread its contents on the bed. Copies of Richard's will, my own will, letters, receipts, a safety net I'd built slowly, privately, without anyone knowing. I wasn't helpless, and I wasn't leaving. The next morning, I did 3 things. First, I went to the bank. Quietly, without announcing it. I spoke to my personal advisor, a sharp woman named Judith, who wore her hair in a twist so tight I could hear it creak when she moved. "I'd like to remove Andrew Bowen from all financial authorizations and freeze any shared access to my accounts," I said. Judith looked surprised. "May I ask why?" "You may," I said, folding my hands, "but I won't answer." She smiled faintly. "Understood." She handed me the paperwork. I signed without hesitation. Second, I visited the courthouse and requested a copy of the deed. Just as I feared, the house was still legally in Andrew's name. A gift from Richard years ago, meant as a gesture of family continuity. Never questioned, never contested. But here's what Andrew didn't expect. I had every document, every bank statement, every repair bill and tax receipt for the past 20 years in my name. The house might be his on paper, but I was the one who kept it standing. Ellen would help me with that part. Finally, I stopped by the party store. I stood in the aisle looking at decorations, not because I needed them, but because I wanted to understand what kind of show they were putting on in my absence. There were golden paper lanterns like the ones Annabelle always swooned over in home magazines. There were mason jars, fairy lights, rustic chic napkins, name tags shaped like little oak leaves. I imagined my dining room cleared of my crocheted tablecloth, replaced with long tables, carefully curated, as if no old woman had ever cried over a forgotten birthday there. I didn't buy anything. I just watched. And then, before leaving, I bought one single item, a blank place card. White. Simple. Elegant. I wrote one word on it in my neatest handwriting. Still here, and tucked it into my purse. Let them set the table. Let them plan their wine pairings and gluten-free desserts. Let them toast to a future I was no longer part of. Because I planned to be there. Not with noise, not with anger, but with presence. A quiet return to the table they'd tried to clear. And when dessert came, if it came, I'd serve something else entirely. Truth. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Not since the realtor's visit. Not since the missing vase, the misplaced spice jars, the silent swapping out of hand towels in the guest bath. They were preparing it, prepping it like a stage, as if my life were clutter to be swept aside before the show. But I was done waiting in the wings. That morning, I folded the quilt on the foot of my bed with a precision that surprised me. It felt like preparing for something sacred. Not war, no. I wasn't angry the way they'd expect. I was steady, like a woman who knew exactly where to place each thread in her needle. I brewed my coffee stronger than usual and sat with my planner, open to the day Andrew had selected, Saturday, 6 p.m. That's when the guests would arrive. The invitations had gone out by email. Halle had shown me hers, still assuming I was on the list. She'd even picked out a dress. I hadn't told her? Not yet. There was no need to put shame on her shoulders. She was too young to carry the weight of her parents' decisions. Better she smile a little longer before the truth arrived with dessert. By 10:20 a.m., I was in my attorney's office, Ellen typing rapidly while I reviewed the documents. A revocation of financial proxy. A formal request to challenge sole property ownership, citing my decades of exclusive maintenance and financial investment. And a new trust, to be named in Halle's honor. She'll find out eventually, but not yet. I didn't want her love confused with gratitude. I wanted it to remain clean. I can deliver the notice to Andrew personally, Ellen offered, sliding the folder toward me. But if you prefer— No, I said, meeting her eyes. Let him hear it from me. After. She nodded. I left the office with my spine straight. Outside, the wind had picked up. August, in Missouri, still thought it was July. Humid, restless, full of unsaid things. I paused in the parking lot and looked up at the sky. The clouds were slow and low, like the world was holding its breath. Let it hold it a little longer. Back home, I opened the old cedar chest at the foot of the bed. Inside, the dress. Dark navy blue. Thick fabric. No shine, no shimmer. Just quiet elegance. I hadn't worn it in years. It used to hang in Richard's closet, pressed between his suits. He said I looked indisputable in it. Not beautiful, not graceful. Indisputable. That's what I wanted now. I laid the dress on the bed and looked at the shoes beside it. Black, low heel, scuffed at the toe. I polished them until they looked almost new, then set them beneath the hem like soldiers at attention. I opened my vanity drawer and pulled out my mother's pearl earrings. Not flashy, not loud, just steady little reminders of someone who never begged for respect, but always received it. The rest of the afternoon was quiet. I brewed tea. I sat in the living room. I opened the window and let the warm breeze stir the curtains. I didn't need to rehearse what I would say. The power wasn't in words, it was in the showing up. At 5:45 p.m., I got into the car. My own. Still in my name. Still under my control. The streets were familiar. Maple trees overhanging cracked sidewalks. Little children on bikes. A sprinkler spraying the corner lawn like it had every August since I moved here. I passed the church, where they'd told the story of my happy relocation. I passed the pharmacy, where the staff still knew me by name. And then I turned onto Elmhurst Drive. My driveway was full. Cars of cousins I hadn't seen in years. Annabelle's friends from the boutique, who always complimented my baking while sneering at my sweaters. I parked 2 doors down and walked the rest of the way. The house was glowing. Lanterns in the trees. Soft music playing through open windows. Voices. Laughter. I walked up the path and paused at the edge of the lawn. No one saw me. They weren't expecting me. After all, I was in Florida. I stepped onto the porch. The door was unlocked. Of course it was. What danger could there be in a house where the mother was no longer real? I opened the door and stepped inside. The laughter didn't stop. Not yet. Not until I walked farther in. Until I reached the living room. Until I stood, very still, by the archway to the dining room and watched Annabelle carry a tray of shrimp skewers to the table, my table, and Andrew laugh with a drink in his hand, my drinkware in his fingers. I didn't speak. Not yet. Because sometimes the loudest noise you can make is just being there. I wasn't supposed to be there. Not in that room. Not in that dress. Not in the breath between a raised glass and the first bite of celebration. But I was. And every face at that table told the same story the moment they saw me. Shock, then panic, then a scrambling effort to appear unfazed. As if I'd walked in not as their mother, not as the woman they'd buried beneath polite fiction, but as a storm they thought they'd already outlived. Annabelle was the first to react. She blinked, lips parting just slightly, hands frozen mid-gesture over the tray of shrimp. Her earrings, dangling gold, expensive, swayed gently with the tremble in her spine. Andrew was slower. He turned, mid-laugh, toward the archway where I stood. The smile on his face wilted like a flower under frost. His mouth opened, closed, then tightened into a polite grimace, like I was someone from the wrong guest list. A distant cousin with poor timing. I didn't speak. Not at first. I let them see me. The navy dress. The polished shoes. The pearl earrings. The hair pulled back just enough to show I still knew how to carry myself. Not a ghost. Not an afterthought. A presence. The room hushed, one voice at a time. Conversations drifted into silence like a wave pulling back before a break. Hallie saw me next. She stood so fast her chair scraped the floor. "Grandma?" she said, half a whisper, half a cry. I gave her a small nod. Nothing theatrical. Just enough to say I see you too. She came to me then, moving past chairs and elbows, and wrapped her arms around me. Real, warm, unworried about how it looked. "I didn't know," she whispered into my shoulder. "I know, sweetheart," I replied. Andrew cleared his throat, the sound sharp and rehearsed. "Mom," he said, stepping forward, his smile forced and shaky. This is unexpected. Yes, I said simply. It is. Annabelle set the tray down with a clink, recovering just enough to smooth her dress and smile wide. We didn't know you'd be back from Florida so soon, she said, voice honeyed with falseness. I looked at her, slowly, long enough for the others to feel it. I never left. There it was, the first crack in the room. A cousin coughed. Someone lowered their champagne glass. I don't understand, Andrew said. You told Carol. I told no one anything, I cut him off, because I was here, the entire time, right in this house, right where you were standing. He flinched like I'd touched a nerve. Good. I stepped farther into the room, glancing at the table. The fine linen cloth, new, the centerpieces, delicate, symmetrical, the wine glasses from my china cabinet, the good silver I hadn't seen in months. Lovely setup, I said. Almost didn't recognize the place. Mom, we were going to... I'm sure you were. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just kept walking, one slow step at a time, around the edge of the table, until I reached the empty seat at the head. My seat. The one they hadn't dared assign to anyone else. The one that sat awkwardly, glaringly vacant. I pulled out the chair and sat down. Not a single person moved. The silence pressed against the walls, heavy and thick. You could hear the creak of the wood beneath my heels. I received a lovely postcard, I said, resting my hands on the table. From my granddaughter, inviting me to this very dinner. Imagine my confusion. No one dared answer. Annabelle opened her mouth, but Andrew put a hand on her arm. Mom, he began again, more quietly this time, we were under the impression that you'd decided to step back, that you needed rest. A break from everything. A break, I repeated. Yes, Florida, Lucille. Lucille doesn't exist. He paused, swallowed. I turned to the guests. Did everyone get the same story? I asked. That I'd moved? That I needed a change of scenery? A few nodded. One or two looked away. Hallie remained standing beside me, her hand lightly resting on the back of my chair, like a small defiance. I didn't move, I said. I was here when the locks were changed. I was here when the cleaners came. I was here when the realtor stopped by unannounced. I've watched my house become a stage for a life I was written out of. Andrew's face had gone pale. You weren't supposed to find out like this, he said, barely audible. No, I agreed. I wasn't supposed to find out at all. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small place card. White, clean. I placed it in front of my plate. Still here. Not a speech, not an accusation. Just truth, quietly set on linen. No one dared touch their glasses, and I sat in the chair that had always been mine, indisputable. The house felt unfamiliar, and yet every corner ached with memory. I sat at the head of the table while the guests around me shifted in their seats, unsure of what came next. No one reached for a fork. No one touched the wine. Outside, the lantern swayed slightly in the evening breeze, casting soft light through the windows. Inside, it was much colder. Andrew stood behind his chair, not quite sitting, not quite walking away. Annabelle had gone to the kitchen, allegedly to check on the dessert, though we all knew it was to escape the silence pressing in on her like humidity before a storm. A few cousins glanced nervously at each other. One of them, I think it was Elaine, mumbled something about needing to step outside and make a call. She never came back. I didn't move. I didn't need to. The room was already unraveling, word by word, glance by glance. I watched as Hallie moved to the sideboard, pouring herself a glass of water. Her hands were steady, her face unreadable. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't pretending. The others weren't so brave. "I think this is a private family matter," someone said from the far end of the table. I looked in their direction, then nodded once. "It is." One by one, guests began excusing themselves. They spoke in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact, offering weak smiles that wilted before they reached me. A few muttered apologies they didn't mean. Some just slipped out the door, relieved to escape the awkwardness that hung in the air like smoke. Within 15 minutes, the dining room that had been packed with bodies and laughter had thinned to a handful of figures and half-empty wine glasses. Annabelle reappeared at the edge of the room, no dessert in hand. She glanced at Andrew. "Maybe we should speak somewhere else," she said, her voice tight. Andrew gave her a look. A silent exchange passed between them. Part fear, part calculation. I stood. The chair made a soft scraping sound against the hardwood. I turned to face them both. "I won't stay," I said. "I didn't come here to ruin your evening." Andrew opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. "I came to reclaim my place, and to say something clearly, so there are no more misunderstandings." The room was hushed now. The few who remained leaned in, eyes wide. "You've built a life that no longer includes me. That much is obvious. But you did it without honesty, without courage. You made me disappear by choice. And while I might not be young, and I might not be fashionable or convenient," I looked straight at Annabelle, "I am not gone." Andrew flinched. "I will not be handled," I said, my voice clear. "Not like an old lamp. Not like a burden to be moved out of sight." "I didn't mean," Andrew began. But again I stopped him. "You meant exactly what you did." I turned to Halej and softened. "You're the only one who asked where I went. The only one who noticed I was missing." Halej's throat bobbed as she swallowed, her eyes wet. I reached into my purse and pulled out a slim envelope, pale blue, heavy paper, my handwriting on the front. I handed it to her. "What is it?" she whispered. "Your name," I said simply. "Your name where it counts." I didn't elaborate. Not here. Not in front of those who'd already made their choices. Andrew was watching the envelope like it might explode. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "This doesn't have to be—" "No," I interrupted. "It doesn't have to be anything. You chose this. You locked the door and handed the key to someone else. I simply walked back in." I picked up my bag. My coat. I looked once more around the room. The wallpaper we'd hung together after Richard passed. The floor I scrubbed before every birthday. The fireplace that never worked quite right, but still glowed in winter. Every inch of this place had known my hands, and every person in it had decided I no longer belonged. Except one. "Haley," I said, turning toward the door. "Will you walk me out?" She nodded and followed. We stepped out onto the porch. The air was cooler now, cleaner. "Grandma," she said once we reached the sidewalk, "are you okay?" I paused, and I smiled. I'm finally on my way home. They didn't follow me. I waited a moment by the sidewalk, letting the quiet settle around my shoulders like an old shawl. Hallie stood beside me, her hand still wrapped around the blue envelope like it might dissolve if she let go. From the porch, the light inside the house spilled warm and golden. It touched the steps, but never quite reached me. Like even the house knew where the border was now. "Do you want me to drive you?" Hallie asked gently. "No, darling. I said, pulling my keys from my purse. "I drove myself here. I can drive myself away." She nodded, but didn't move. "I didn't know, Grandma. I swear I didn't. I thought you'd be at the head of the table. I imagined you bringing out that weird casserole only you like, the one with the cornflakes on top." I smiled. "It's not weird. It's Midwestern." She smiled, but her eyes brimmed with tears. "How could they?" I touched her hand. "Because they could, and because I let them for a long time." I didn't say it with bitterness, just truth. Plain, settled truth. Sometimes people don't turn cruel with one decision. Sometimes they wear it in layers over years. One skipped visit, one unreturned call, one story rewritten ever so slightly. Until suddenly, you're gone. Not dead, just deleted. But tonight, I wrote myself back in. I leaned in and kissed her forehead. "You're the part of this family I don't regret," I said softly. She closed her eyes, holding the words like breath. I turned to leave, but paused one last time. Inside the house, Andrew stood by the window. He was watching, half-shadowed, motionless, not ashamed, not angry, just lost. Like he'd only now realized the weight of what he'd done, and maybe the permanence of it. We didn't wave, we didn't speak, and I didn't break eye contact. Not until I reached my car and got in. My hands trembled a little as I turned the key. Not from fear, not from age, just from the aftershock of standing up in a room I wasn't supposed to be in anymore. It takes something out of you, even when you win. I drove slowly, back through the neighborhood where all the porches still had lights on, where people gathered for late dinners or watched TV through half-drawn curtains, or rocked gently in chairs, waiting for nothing in particular. At the corner of Maple and 6th, the stop sign I'd slowed at for 37 years gleamed under the street lamp. I paused there longer than necessary, because I wasn't driving away from something. I was driving toward myself. When I pulled into the driveway of the small rental I'd quietly arranged 2 weeks ago, just in case, I felt no sadness, only relief. A little one-story house, white siding, old rose bushes along the fence. It smelled like earth and dry pine needles. Inside, there were only boxes and one lamp on a timer. But it was mine. No one else's key. No one else's hands rearranging the shelves when I wasn't looking. I stepped inside, slipped off my shoes, and breathed in the silence. It didn't echo with laughter or footsteps yet. It didn't know my stories, but it would. I placed my purse on the counter, my coat on the hook. The envelope I'd handed to Halle earlier, her name, her future, was mirrored by another I kept in my bag. Instructions for the bank, the lawyer, the trust. One for her, one from me. 2 ends of the same line I refused to let be cut. I walked into the bedroom and pulled the blinds closed. The wind stirred the curtains. The kind of wind that signals seasons are shifting, whether the calendar agrees or not. I sat on the edge of the bed, unzipped the dress, and laid it carefully across the chair. The blue fabric looked softer now, not like armor, just like something that had served its purpose. The clock ticked, the lamp hummed, and I listened to the stillness not with dread, but with gratitude. They'd tried to host a celebration in my absence. I'd made sure they'd never forget I was present. Back at the house, the banquet was unraveling. They'd lit the candles, set the table, polished the silver. But now, with half the chairs empty and the scent of panic thick in the air, it felt less like a celebration and more like a wake, only no one was sure what had died. Andrew sat stiffly at the far end of the table, his jaw clenched, his hand hovering over his untouched glass. Annabelle sat next to him, silent for once, her fingers worrying the linen napkin in her lap. The cousins who'd stayed were frozen between polite conversation and stunned silence, unable to decide whether to carry on or pretend the night had never happened. It was the waiter, young, polite, with an over-polished name tag that read Derek, who finally broke the tension. He approached with a tray of champagne and stopped just short of Andrew. "Would you like to begin dessert service, sir?" Annabelle flinched. Andrew glanced at her, then back at Derek. No. Maybe hold off for a bit." Derek nodded, but didn't move. Just give us a minute," Andrew added, voice flat. The waiter hesitated. Then he stepped back quietly, but not before his eyes flicked toward the door where I'd stood just minutes earlier. The staff had seen it all. They always did. Everything people pretended to whisper. Everything hosts assumed would stay private. The kitchen always knew before the guests did. When Derek returned to the service station, another waiter leaned toward him. "She was the mom, right?" she whispered. He nodded. "She looked like she owned the place." "She does," he said under his breath. "Just not on paper." Back in the dining room, Annabelle finally spoke, her voice low and tight. "Well," she said, forcing a thin smile toward the remaining guests, "that was unfortunate. Unfortunate, not wrong, not cruel, just inconvenient." Andrew didn't look at her. He just stared at the place card still sitting at the head of the table. White, stark. "Still here." He'd removed it once I left, quietly, slipped it into his pocket, but its outline remained, like a shadow burned into the cloth. No one touched the food. The roast chicken, which Annabelle had ordered from a high-end caterer and passed off as homemade, sat untouched. The sides were cooling. The wine had gone warm in its glasses. "I don't think I can stay," one cousin murmured to her husband. "This feels, I don't know, like we weren't told the whole story," he answered, glancing toward Andrew. Someone got up and left. Then another. Then three at once. The front door opened, closed, opened again. Within half an hour, only family remained. Annabelle exhaled sharply and pushed back from the table. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. She knew what she was doing. She waited for the exact moment. "She had every right," Hallie said, her voice quiet but firm. Annabelle blinked. "Excuse me?" "She had every right to be here. This is her house." Annabelle scoffed. "Technically, it's Andrew's, and we didn't think—" "That's the problem," Haley interrupted. "You didn't think. Or maybe you did. Maybe you thought if you made her invisible long enough, she'd just disappear." Andrew shifted in his seat. "I didn't want a scene," he muttered. "No," Hallie said. "You just wanted her out of the picture. Quietly. Permanently. With a story neat enough to serve with dessert." Silence again. Then Derek reappeared, hovering with a tray of tiny white plates. "Shall I clear the table?" he asked, almost apologetically. Andrew hesitated, then gave a single nod. As Derek began to remove the untouched dishes, he paused at the place where I'd sat. The only clean plate. No crumbs. No stains. Just a single white card, now returned quietly to the table. He picked it up, read the words, and smiled just slightly. "Still here." He slipped the card into his apron pocket like a secret worth keeping. And when he turned to go, he looked over his shoulder one last time at the family who'd tried to celebrate without their matriarch. They'd prepared everything, except the truth. When I stood at the head of the table, No one interrupted me. They couldn't. Words have a weight when you've held them inside too long, and mine had been steeping for years. I rested my palms on the edge of the linen cloth. The room smelled of rosemary, citrus, and tension. Candles flickered like they were afraid to burn too bright. "I won't take long," I said. "You've all got places to be, just not mine." No one laughed. Good. I looked at each of them in turn, not with anger, but with precision. I wanted them to know I saw them. Every expression, every twitch of discomfort, every glance downward that tried to avoid me. "You raised your glasses in this house tonight," I said. "You toasted to new beginnings, to milestones. Some of you called it a fresh chapter. Some of you called it long overdue. What you didn't call it was what it was: a quiet funeral for the living." A breath caught somewhere to my left. I didn't bother turning toward it. "You thought I'd gone away, or that I would, or that if you didn't speak of me, I'd fade like wallpaper left too long in the sun. And that might have worked if I were paper. But I'm not." I straightened, letting my hands fall to my sides. "I'm bone and will and memory. I'm Sunday dinners and scraped knees. I'm the voice that told bedtime stories when your father worked too late to say goodnight. I'm the reason Andrew had a home to inherit in the first place. Not because I paid the bills, though I did. Not because I mowed the lawn after your father died, though I did that too. But because I kept this place warm." The silence was deeper now. No one moved. I took one slow step around the table. Let them feel it. "You forgot that. Or maybe you remembered and just didn't care. Maybe it was easier to turn me into an errand you didn't have to run, a check you didn't have to write, a call you didn't have to return." I stopped behind Andrew's chair. He didn't turn around. "You told people I was in Florida, that I had a friend, that I needed warm weather and help. You made it sound like a kindness, like you were caring for me from a distance." I leaned slightly toward him, voice low but clear. "That lie? It wasn't for me. It was for you. So you didn't have to look anyone in the eye and admit you didn't want me anymore." Still, he didn't speak. And I didn't push him to. I walked back to my seat, the one they'd left conspicuously empty, and looked at Haley. Her eyes were wet, but steady. "I didn't come back for revenge," I said. "That's not who I am. I came back to remind you that I exist, that you don't get to write me out just because I make the story more complicated." I reached into my purse and pulled out one final item: a photograph. It was old, creased at the corners, faded with time, but unmistakable. Andrew, age 6, sitting on my lap, frosting on his cheek, his arms wrapped around my neck like the world ended just beyond me. I placed it on the table. "I kept this," I said, "because I wanted to remember who we were. But I realize now I kept it for the wrong reason. I thought it would remind me of love, but what it reminds me of is responsibility. I was yours. You were mine. That meant something." I let the photo sit there, the candlelight catching the glossy edge. Then I looked around once more. "You don't have to love me. That's your right. But you will not erase me. Not from this house. Not from your story. Not from the truth." And with that, I sat down. Not because I was finished, but because I was complete. The room didn't move. After I sat, it was like no one knew what to do with the silence I'd left behind. It wasn't heavy. Not anymore. It was clear, like a wind that had finally swept through a house long sealed shut. Andrew was the first to break. He stood slowly, pushing back from the table with a stiffness that made him look older than he was. His hands shook. Not much, but enough that he shoved them into his pockets. "Mom?" he said, but even he heard how small the word sounded. I didn't look at him. I just waited. He cleared his throat. I didn't mean for this to happen the way it did. It wasn't meant to be. Like this." His voice cracked a little. And still, I said nothing. He looked down at the floor, searching for something that might excuse what had already been done. "I thought you were tired," he said. "I thought you might be happier somewhere quieter. Somewhere warmer. You've said yourself the stairs were getting hard. You don't go into the backyard anymore. I thought maybe it was time." I raised my eyes then, not harshly, not accusingly, just so he could see the difference between his justifications and the reality sitting across from him. "You thought," I said finally, without asking. Andrew flinched. "I was going to call. I swear. I was just waiting until after the dinner. I didn't want to upset you before. I just wanted one peaceful night." I looked around the room. "Is this peaceful to you?" He didn't answer. Behind him, Annabelle hovered near the kitchen door, arms folded across her stomach, lips drawn tight. Her silence was her defense. Let Andrew take the blame. Let him be the one who miscalculated. Halle didn't move. She was still at my side, her fingers gently resting on the back of my chair. Like a flag planted in ground, she refused to give up. Andrew stepped closer. "I thought I was helping. Really. I thought if we could just make the transition easy, that maybe it wouldn't hurt so much." "That's the problem," I said quietly. "You thought it should be easy. You forgot that love isn't convenient, and neither is truth." He sank into his chair then, slowly, like the effort of standing had finally caught up with him. "I'm sorry," he said. Not loudly, not convincingly, just a threadbare whisper, fraying at the edges. And I nodded. Not in forgiveness, not in agreement. Just a simple acknowledgement that I'd heard the words. But I didn't respond. Because not everything deserves an answer. Sometimes silence is its own kind of reply. The one people remember longest. The one that leaves them sitting with themselves after the lights are off and the guests are gone. He looked at me again. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. "I know," I said. I stood. I didn't slam my chair back. I didn't storm out. I just rose the way a woman rises when she's carried more than her share for too long and finally decides to set it down. I looked at Halle. "Let's go." She stood beside me, tall and steady. Not a child anymore, not just a granddaughter. She was something more now. A witness. A line that couldn't be crossed. As we walked toward the front door, Annabelle finally found her voice. "So, what now? You're just leaving? That's it?" I paused at the threshold. "You already planned for me to be gone," I said, not turning around. "I'm simply giving you what you wanted. But you're angry." "No," I said. "I'm awake." Then I stepped out into the night. Behind me, the house didn't follow. It stayed where it was, full of warmth that no longer had anything to do with me. And that was fine, because I had my own keys now. We didn't speak on the drive back. Halle kept her hands in her lap, the envelope still tucked between her fingers like something sacred. The streetlights flicked past the windshield, scattering long shadows across her face, and every so often she glanced at me, not out of fear, but as if checking that I was still real. Still here. I was. More than I'd been in years. When we pulled into the driveway of the small white house I'd rented, the porch light clicked on automatically. It lit the path in soft gold, touching the rose bushes and the faint outline of the welcome mat I hadn't stepped on until this week. I didn't ask if she wanted to come in. I just unlocked the door, stepped inside, and held it open. She followed without hesitation. The living room was bare but clean. A few boxes were stacked against the wall, and the lamp on the end table gave off a warm, quiet light. I had no art on the walls yet. No rugs, no clutter, just air and space, and the sound of the world finally making room for me again. "Tea?" I asked. Holly smiled gently. "Always." I moved into the kitchen, small, square, bright. The kettle was already filled from earlier. I turned the knob and let the soft hiss begin. She walked slowly around the room, looking at the details. The calendar on the fridge marked with handwritten notes. The stack of mail sorted neatly into categories. The worn cutting board from my old house, now resting on a clean countertop. "You brought this," she said, touching the edge of the board. "It remembers better than I do," I said. She nodded. When the tea was ready, we sat at the small table by the window, the one I'd found secondhand, and polished myself with lemon oil. I poured her cup first, then mine. It wasn't the fancy china. It wasn't the company setting. It was better. Because it was chosen, not just used. She turned the envelope over in her hands, then looked at me. "Can I ask what this is?" "You can ask," I said. "But I'm not going to tell you everything. Not yet." She tilted her head, curious. "It's yours," I said. "Not a gift, not a reward, a recognition." "Of what?" "Of seeing what others chose not to see." She looked down at the envelope again, then back up at me. "But I didn't do anything." I smiled. "That's not true. You didn't look away. And you didn't stay quiet." She blinked, as if absorbing the weight of that. "You didn't have to hand me a microphone," I continued. "You just had to stand next to me. And you did." She opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like she was unwrapping a fragile truth. Inside were 3 things: a notarized statement naming her as the sole beneficiary of the new trust I'd created, property, savings, personal items, all marked with clear intent. A letter, handwritten, folded in thirds, dated 2 days after I called Ellen. A small brass key. She held the key between her fingers. "What's this for?" I reached into my purse and pulled out a second key, identical. I held it up. "This house," I said. "You and me, we hold it now. Not Andrew, not Annabelle. Not anyone who left a chair empty and pretended it was never meant to be filled." Her eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Not right away. She looked around the room again, as if seeing it for the first time, not as a visitor, but as part of something. "I want you to come and go as you please," I said. "Not because I need help. Not because I'm old. But because some places deserve to be shared while we're still living in them." She smiled, then wiped her cheek quickly with the back of her hand. "This place doesn't look like much," I said, "but it's mine. I chose it. I paid for it. I walked into it with both feet and no apologies, and now so have you." She reached for her tea, but her hands were shaking a little. She set it down again. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything." We sat in silence a while, letting the steam from our cups rise between us like something holy. Eventually, she spoke again, voice quiet. "Do they know?" "About the house?" I asked. "About the trust? About you?" She nodded. "Not yet." I took a sip of tea. "They will." She looked at the key again. I'll be careful with it." "You don't have to be," I said. "It's yours now, too. Not to guard, to use." She smiled. "Can I leave an extra sweater here?" "You can leave a drawer," I said. It rang late, well past the hour most people call without bad news. I was already in bed. The new sheets were stiff, not yet softened by years of wash and wear. But the bed was mine. The quiet was mine. No footsteps overhead. No whispers behind closed doors. Just the tick of the clock and the soft rustle of wind against the rose bushes outside. The phone buzzed once, then twice, then lit the dark room like a flare. Andrew. The name blinked on the screen like it needed me to care. I didn't reach for it. I lay still, watching it ring, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because everything had already been said. It stopped, then rang again. Same name, same need, same lateness. I waited, let it go to voicemail. And when the silence returned, I closed my eyes and let the stillness settle again. He called 4 more times before morning. He didn't leave a message. Not one. Just that digital gasp of uncertainty. Reaching, pausing, then pulling back. The sound of someone realizing too late that the door they'd closed was now locked from the other side. When the sun came up, I sat at the kitchen table with my tea and listened to the stillness that followed a man who'd run out of justifications. I didn't call him back. I didn't need to. Some conversations don't need replies. They need endings. Instead, I looked at the photograph Hallie had placed on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a daisy. It was the 2 of us on the front porch, arms around each other, smiling like we'd always been exactly where we belonged. That was what mattered now. Later that morning, a letter arrived. Thick envelope. No return address. I knew the handwriting. Inside, a folded page. "Mom, I don't know what to say. I keep trying to find the right words, and none come. I keep replaying everything. I don't know how we ended up here. I thought I was helping. I swear, I thought I was making things easier. For you, for us. I didn't realize what I was taking away. I don't expect forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. I miss the way things used to be. I miss the house. I miss you in it. Love, Andrew." I read it once. Then again. And then I folded it neatly and set it inside the cedar box at the foot of my bed. Not to cherish. Not to hold on to. But to file away with the other things I no longer needed to carry. I didn't reply. Because apologies only matter when they're spoken before the locks are changed, before the tables are reset, before the mother is rewritten into a footnote. And I was no longer interested in being a chapter in his story. I had my own now, one with clear walls, clear air, clear sight, and the only voices inside it belonged to those who'd stayed. I didn't make a speech, didn't post a photo, didn't call anyone to explain or defend or relive what had already unfolded in its own necessary way. I just lived. That was the quiet, final act of defiance, one they wouldn't notice until far too late. No drama, no demand to be seen. Just a woman who continued, calmly and fully, after being told she didn't exist anymore. The new house settled around me like something exhaled. Mornings were mine again. I opened the windows early, let the breeze stir the curtains, and the smell of jasmine and grass drift through each room. I brewed strong coffee and sipped it slowly, barefoot, with no need to be ready for anyone's arrival. I started writing again, not novels or anything worth publication, just pages. Pages of memory, recipes, scraps of phrases, names of people I hadn't said aloud in years. I didn't need an audience. I needed reflection. The difference is important. Some afternoons, I walked to the market. The butcher knew my name now. The woman who ran the plant stall started setting aside a small pot of rosemary for me each week. "The good one," she'd whisper with a wink. "Yours like sunlight." She meant the bush by my fence. It was thriving. Everything was. Hallie came by most Saturdays. She brought flour on her hands and books in her bag, and always, always asked before reaching into my fridge. Not out of politeness, but respect. We didn't always talk about it, what happened. Some days we did, some days we didn't. But she never avoided the truth. And she never used past tense when speaking about me. That's how I knew she understood. One weekend, she brought me a gift, a small wooden box with a hinged lid. Inside were index cards, neatly labeled. Questions for later. She said it was a project, something to build slowly. Write answers when you want, she told me. Or don't. Just know the questions are there. Some were simple. What was your first job? Who did you almost marry? What meal reminds you of being in love? Some were harder. What did you forgive that you probably shouldn't have? Who taught you silence? When did you stop expecting the apology? I didn't rush to fill them. Some I never will. But it mattered that she asked. She made space, and in doing so, she gave me permission to exist again, not as a relic or an obligation, but as a woman, still in motion. One warm afternoon in early fall, we sat on the porch. I brought out lemonade. She brought nothing but herself. We didn't talk about the old house. We didn't need to. She reached into her bag and pulled out her own set of keys, the brass one I'd given her weeks ago, now worn at the teeth from use. She dangled it once and said, "I like knowing I can come in without knocking." I nodded. "I like knowing you want to." A few leaves rustled from the maple out front. The air was cooler, the sun lower, the kind of day that makes you ache for nothing at all, just grateful to have reached it. I looked at her then, not as a granddaughter, not even as family, just as a person who'd chosen to stay in the story, who hadn't looked away when things got hard. "You know," I said, "there was a time I thought I'd be erased." "You were never erasable," she said without hesitation. I believed her. That's the difference. They wrote me off with clean hands and polished smiles. But she wrote me back with quiet visits and honest questions. And that, in the end, is what matters. Not who left, but who stayed. Who kept asking. Who kept setting a place at the table even after others cleared it away. There was no announcement. No final confrontation. No perfect closure with Andrew. Just a door he chose to close, and one I chose not to reopen. And there was peace in that. The kind of peace that doesn't ask to be loud. The kind that sits with you on a porch while the sun sets. The kind that holds a key and says, "You are still here." Because I was. Because I am. Because no one, not even your own blood, gets to decide when your story ends.